Hey guys, this is Tech Howdy. I welcome you to another video tutorial where we are building this CMS application using Angular 10 and ASP.NET Core 3. In the last video tutorial, we finished working on the authentication service auth method and the generate new token method. In this video tutorial, we will be working on the login method where we will be forwarding the user's credential, that is email password, to the authentication service so that these details are validated and we get a response back from the authentication service. If you haven't watched the video tutorial where we build the auth method and the generate new token method, I recommend you to go ahead and watch it in the playlist. Now let's go ahead and start working on the login method. So let's go to the account controller, and in the account controller we are going to create another login method. Before creating the login method, let's go ahead and specify that this login method is supposed to be an HTTP get login method, whereas the login method that we are going to create now will be an HTTP post request. So if you're not familiar with HTTP get, HTTP post, put or delete, I recommend you that you read up the instructions or read up the documentation on HTTP requests or types of HTTP requests, because this is basic of uh, action filters that we use over MVC actions. So now let's go ahead and now create the login method for HTTP post. So we are creating a login method, but before we create a login method, just to mention, I have added a allow anonymous attribute on these methods, which also means that these methods can be accessed without the user having to be logged in into the application. So they don't need a token to access this method. This method can be accessed without a token. So any person, any anonymous person can access this method. So now the inside the post method, let's change this to a task, and then we are going to return a task of object type iActionResult. Now if we are adding the allow anonymous attribute, we need to make sure that we add the reference to AspNetCore.Authorization. In the login methods parameters, we need to specify that we are going to pass a login view model object, and we also are going to specify the string for return URL. Initially, if the return URL is not specified, then I'm going to set the return URL to be null. Now a return URL is basically the URL that what the user was initially trying to access. So I wanted to access the home page of the admin panel. Since I was not logged in, I was redirected to the login page. Now once I log in back into the application, I need to be redirected back to the home page, because that was the page which I was initially trying to access. If the return URL is not provided, then the default value is null, which means that if the default value is null, we will redirect the user back to the home page instead of any other page. We will work on this and I'll explain to you how it works while we use this particular object property in the implementation. But for now, for the parameters, that's all we need. Now we also need to specify from where we are going to supply these parameters or the login view model object. Now the login view model object is nothing but it contains the email, password, and remember me attribute of the users that they provide using the login form. And we are going to pass this object to the request of the HTTP body from the body. So I'm going to specify the from body attribute over here, which means the values will be provided inside the HTTP request body and it will be accessed through this from body attribute. Now let's work on the logic to log in the user. Here inside the account controller, we would need some values to be instantiated using dependency injection before we start working on the login method, because we need to use these objects inside our login method. So let's go ahead and create some private objects here, and using the constructor we will instantiate the objects inside the constructor using dependency injection. So if you want to know the shortcut to create a constructor, you just need to type in CTOR and press tab twice. This will create the constructor for you in the class. Now inside the constructors parameters here, we will pass the dependent objects. So let's go ahead and add them here. I will add the missing references to the objects so that we get rid of all these errors. You can find all the missing references that I have added here in the import statements. So uh, these are the projects that we created for authentication service and cookie service. We don't have the references here to import. That's because we have not yet referenced these projects in our main project. So let's go ahead and add the references to the dependencies. So add reference, and here we will add the authentication service and the cookie service as the project dependencies and click OK. Now the project is being restored, and once it's restored we can then add the references or add the import statement. So the project is still being restored. So the package is now successfully restored. Let's go ahead and now click on the iauth service. Now we'll have the references under using auth service, and we will also add the import statement for cookie service. So now let's go ahead and instantiate the objects with the values that we received from the constructor. So here let's go ahead and instantiate the required objects that we need. Now we'll make use of these objects in our login method or any other method that we are going to create here inside the account controller. So first thing, inside the login method, we need to get the return URL from the view data object. And if the return URL is provided, the value will be assigned over here. So we can assign the value using the view data property in our CSHTML file using razor syntax. And then we can access that value here in the method by calling the view data property and the name of the property that we use to assign the value in our razor view. The next thing that we want to do here is go ahead and first check if the model state is valid. Now, model state basically means that the model that we are sending in the as the parameters, we need to make sure that the state of that model is valid. So if we go back to login view model, here we want to make sure that the email is a string, and instead of a string, if somebody sends email that is full of numbers or digits, then the model state will be invalid. So the model state needs to be valid before we proceed. So there is a method that we can use which is called as model state dot is valid. So we will use that. So if the model state is valid, we can further start writing a logic in this method. So when we write the logic, we are going to write it inside a try catch block, and inside the try catch block we are going to log any errors that we find during this process. To log the errors, we are using serilogs as our logging library, and we have created a logging service project. So I'm going to just reference serilog here to add the missing references. Inside the try block, I'm going to create an object called as JWT token, and the value of this JWT token will be provided from the auth service dot the method that we have created inside auth service. So if I go back to the auth service project, now here we have the auth service project, and we want to access this method, which is the auth method. To access this method, we cannot directly access it because the interface has been implemented on this class. So we can use the interface to access this method. Therefore, in our account controller, we have instantiated the interface. But when we call the interface object and then try to access the method, we don't see it over here in under IntelliSense. That because we have to specify this method name in the interface. We don't have to implement the method, we just have to specify the name of the method. So we will copy this task response token response model and paste it over here and add the missing references to system.threading.tasks. And here, once we add this, if we go back to the account controller, now we will have reference option in the IntelliSense to reference that method. So inside the method, as we know, we need to provide a login view object, model object, and the model object comes from the parameters of our method or the HTTP request body. So since this is a task, it's an asynchronous method, I need to await for the result before proceeding further. So we'll wait for the process to work and give us the result. Now, since we want to await, we need to make sure that we make this method asynchronous. So let's go ahead and add the async attribute to the method. And now we can await for the result. Now let's add the further logic that we require. So once we receive a token, we need to create a browser cookie and we need to set the value of these tokens inside the browser cookie before we send the response back to the client. Now, first thing that I'm going to do over here is create an expiry time for the cookie. So any cookie that I'm going to create is going to expire in 60 minutes. That's what I have set here as the expiry time for the cookie, not for the token, but for the cookie. If you want to increase the time, you can go ahead and increase the time. But in the case of admin user, I don't want any cookies to stay in the browser for more than 60 minutes. Now, I need to go ahead and create these cookies. So we have already created a cookie service in our application project, but inside the cookie service, we have not implemented any methods. So let's go ahead and start working on the cookie service where we can create all the required methods to get, delete the cookies. Here inside the cookie service project, we need to add a package. So let's go ahead and add the NUGET package. So right click on your project and go to manage NUGET packages and add the package Microsoft.AspNetCore.Http. Once you have added the latest stable version of the package, then we can go ahead and create two objects in the cookie service project. So the two objects that we need to create is cookie options of type cookie options and of type HTTP context accessor. Both these object types are available under Microsoft.AspNetCore.Http package that we installed. And in the constructor of this cookie service, we are going to instantiate these objects using dependency injection. Now, after we have instantiated the objects, we are going to create certain methods that we require in the cookie service. So here I will specify all the methods that we are going to need in the cookie service. The last three methods that we have here, get user IP, get user country, and get user OS, which is operating system. We will work on these methods on a separate video tutorial, but we will finish working on these methods in this video tutorial. Now, if you notice, I have two methods with the same name, which is setCookie. Now, one method here is an overload that will be used, or we call it method overload in C#, where if we want to create or set a cookie in our application, we can use this setCookie method. By using this setCookie method, the cookie when created will be secure and an HTTP secure flag will be added to the cookie by default. So if any JavaScript in your application is trying to access that cookie in the browser, it wouldn't be able to access it because it has an HTTP secure flag. Whereas if you want to create a cookie in your application that can be accessed by JavaScript, then we will use this setCookie method where we can manually set the isSecure flag to false. So I will show you how this works when we use these methods. And then we have two methods, one to delete the cookie by providing the cookie name, and then we have another method which we can use to delete all the cookies in events where we want to delete all the cookie. We are referencing the IEnumerable interface, so we need to add reference to system.collections.generic. So I will add this reference. Now let's work on the first method, which is to get the cookie by the cookie name. So we need to provide the name of the cookie that we need to get in the parameters of this method, or pass it to the parameters of this method. So we can here make use of the HTTP context accessor object that we created to get the information from the HTTP request that's coming in. So all we need to do is return the HTTP context accessor.http context.request, and inside the request we will search for cookies with the specific name that is provided in the parameter of the get method. So that's it for the get method. Let's work on the set cookie method, where we can manually set the flag of the cookie, whether it needs to be secure or not secure. So here inside this method, we are going to make use of the cookie options object to create a cookie. And here using the cookie options, we are going to specify the expiry time and the flag to make the cookie secure or not secure, and the cookie whether it's HTTP only. And finally, we will append the cookie to the cookie options. Here, if the expiry time is not provided or it's null, then we will set the default time of the cookie to 10 milliseconds. But if the expiry time is provided, then we will use that to set the cookie expiry time. So pretty much straightforward. So nothing here that cannot be understood. So we are going to set the cookie. That's it. Now let's work on the set cookie method, where the cookie will be secure. So here let's add a if condition to check if the expiry time has value, then we will set the cookie expiry time. So I've used a single line operator here to validate the if condition, and here I've used if else. So you can use either or depending on how you feel comfortable using the C# code language. So here now I have added the cookie options HTTP only to be true, because by default if it's not provided and somebody is using this method, this extension method, then we will set it to true. And the option for the same site cookie will be strict. And finally we are going to append this cookie after creating it to the response, to the HTTP response. So to delete the cookie, once again we are just going to use one line of code, which is HTTP context accessor using the response.cookies, specify the cookie that we want to delete calling the delete method, and the name of the cookie can be provided in the parameters of the delete cookie method. Now finally we will work on all delete cookies method. So here the user will provide us with a collection of the cookie names, and we are going to delete those cookies from the browser by fetching them one by one. So to get the cookies one by one, we are going to use a for each loop, and we are going to pass in this collection object where it can loop on it, and then we will call the delete method on each key of the cookie. If you're comfortable using a for loop instead of for each loop, you can change it accordingly, or if you want to use link query, you can do that as well. So as mentioned, that these methods here, we will work on this in a separate video tutorial, but if we don't provide a return type, they are going to give us an error and not let the compiler to compile the code. So let's just return string.empty to get rid of the error. Now this cookie service implements the iCookie service interface that we created. So let's go ahead and add the method names to the interface so that it can be accessed in the other classes. So let's go to the iCookie service interface. Here let's add the method names, and now we should be able to access them. Let's add the missing reference to collections, and that should be it. So now our cookie service is complete. Only methods that are remaining, as I mentioned, this will be in a separate video tutorial. So let's put a flag to do. Okay, now let's close the cookie service and now go back to the account controller. And now inside the account controller, we have the expiry time that we have created. Now let's go ahead and create the cookies and provide this expiry time. So here I'm going to create the cookies using the set cookie method that we just created. I'm going to provide the name for the cookie. So the name for the cookie is access token, and the value will be the token that we received, and the expiry time will be the expiry time that I have set over here. So I'll create three cookies. access token, user ID, and username, and these cookies will be set in the browser when the response is sent back to the client. Finally, I'm going to log in the logs that the user logged in. So here you can also specify user, and you can add some string interpolation like this. And we can specify model dot email. So the email of the user also will be logged in the logs. But if you don't want to specify the email of the user, once again, you don't have to do this. So this is optional. So the login method now looks complete, but here we are saying if model state is valid, then we do the following. But if model state is not valid, then also we need to send a response back to the client. So here, while sending the response back, if the model state is not valid, we will specify the response type as HTTP unauthorized, and we will send a message in the unauthorized response that we are sending back to the user. Now, if the model state is not valid, then we can loop through all the errors that are caused in the model state, and we can store them or we can log them depending on your requirement. But if you need to do that, you can add the models and you can send it back to the user. But in my case, I don't want to do that. I just want to log an error, invalid username, model state.add model errors, and then send a unauthorized response back to the users. But as mentioned, you can get the errors and you can send it back to the user if you want to display the errors back to the user. So that should be it for the login method. So in this video tutorial, we created the uh, login method. We worked on the cookie service. Now in the next video tutorial, let's go ahead and work on adding all these objects that we have instantiated in the pipeline of our application. So if you have any questions, use the comment section. I'll be happy to answer your questions, and all the code will be provided in the DevOps repo. Link will be provided in the video description. Do not forget to like and subscribe my channel Tech Howdy.